This is where discernment becomes non-negotiable. Narcissistic dynamics don't just cause pain. They reconfigure perception itself. Overinflated ego increases internal density to a dense rock, collapses perceptual openness, and introduces constant noise. Intuition and psychic perception require coherence, receptivity, and humility. Therefore, narcissism inevitably destroys them, not morally, but mechanically. This is not punishment, it's physics. A clarification: not everyone with an overinflated ego is a narcissist, but anytime perception serves self-image over truth, distortion is inevitable. This is why genuine intuition always carries humility, silence, willingness to be unseen, and why narcissism cannot access any of it. This is an essential question because narcissistic people don't only lack perception, they misuse it. An overinflated ego doesn't blind someone randomly, it reorders perception around self-image, and that has precise, predictable effects on instinct, intuition, and psychic sensitivity. The core mechanism. Ego inflation replaces truth with identity maintenance. Once self-image becomes the priority, perception no longer asks, "What is true?" It asks, "What preserves my superiority, control, or specialness?" From that moment on, perception is no longer reality-facing, it is self-facing. Instinct under narcissism. From survival intelligence to dominance calibration. What changes? Instinct no longer scans for danger. It scans for status threat. Disagreement feels like attack. Boundaries feel like rejection. Autonomy in others feels like disrespect. Neutral feedback feels hostile. How instinct is hijacked. Fight response is chronically activated. Shame is converted into rage or contempt. Control becomes synonymous with safety. Winning replaces surviving. The body learns, if I am not superior, I am endangered. This produces aggression masked as confidence, hyper-competitiveness, inability to rest, addiction to being right. Instinct becomes a hierarchy enforcer, not a protector. Intuition and psychic sensitivity under narcissism. Intuition and psychic perception require a high signal-to-noise ratio. Overinflated ego is noise. So when ego expands beyond a certain threshold, perception collapses inward, frequency drops, and higher-order perception becomes impossible. Not suppressed, impossible. What frequency actually means here? Frequency is not vibes or moral virtue. It refers to coherence of consciousness, bandwidth of perception, degree of internal integration, openness of the perceptual field. High frequency equals low internal distortion. Low frequency equals high internal distortion. Ego inflation increases distortion exponentially. How narcissism creates distortion. Signal contamination, noise dominance. Intuition and psychic perception require stillness, neutrality, non-reactivity, awareness beyond the self as reference. Ego inflation produces constant internal narration, defensiveness, image management, emotional charge, threat scanning. This is permanent interference. Trying to receive subtle information through an overinflated ego is like listening to a whisper next to a jet engine, trying to make a phone call inside a cave, detecting radio waves inside a Faraday cage. The signal isn't gone, the receiver is compromised. Ego inflation is a dense rock. The heavier the ego, the less penetration, the more echo, the more distortion. Eventually, only one signal remains, the sound of one's own voice. This doesn't mean narcissistic individuals are less than. It means they are self-occluded. They live inside their own cave, mistaking echo for signal, certainty for insight, noise for awareness. True perception always requires one thing narcissism cannot tolerate: ego thinning. Hierarchical inversion. In high-functioning perception, truth informs identity. In narcissism, identity dictates truth. Once identity dictates reality, intuition has no authority. Any perception that threatens self-image is rejected, reframed, attacked, projected outward. This creates epistemic closure. No new information can enter. Intuition requires openness to being wrong. Narcissism makes that impossible. In healthy perception, intuition governs ego. In narcissism, ego governs intuition. This single inversion explains lack of remorse, inability to apologize authentically, rage when confronted with the truth, collapse when admiration is removed. Reality becomes negotiable. Image does not. Narcissism hijacks instinct by equating safety with dominance. It hijacks intuition by bending truth to identity. It hijacks psychic sensitivity by turning perception into projection. The biggest tragedy is not ignorance, it is misdirected intelligence. Why narcissistic spirituality is hollow. This explains why narcissistic individuals may talk about deep topics, claim knowledge and wisdom, use spiritual language, display performative insight, but their perception never deepens, never self-corrects, never humbles, never liberates. Because intuition depends on the ability to update perception, and identity attachment to ideas prevents all of this. Anything that disrupts a healthy balance between the perception of self and what is not intuitive, even if it feels powerful. The paradox that exposes everything. Here's the cleanest diagnostic. The more someone insists on their knowledge, wisdom, or intuitive or psychic superiority, the less likely it is to be real. Why? Because real intuition doesn't need to announce itself, doesn't defend itself, doesn't inflate identity, doesn't fear being unseen. One final distinction. Low frequency must advertise. High frequency doesn't care.